Ladies and gentlemen, hello and good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tough Talk, a special edition on Tough Talk here on Monday, January the 4th. The reason, of course, we have this special night is because tomorrow night is maybe the biggest night in 2021 already, 5 days in, as we head to see two of the biggest Senate runoffs in Georgia history that will decide the state and the balance of the United States Senate. Obviously, of course, the special election, which we knew was going to be here between incumbent Senator Kelly Leffler and Raphael Warnock, but also the big surprise going into tonight, we have another runoff, of course. Jon Ossoff did drag incumbent David Perdue into a runoff by only a couple of thousand votes. So we have two runoffs. If Democrats win both, they will gain control of the Senate thanks to the tiebreaker by new Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. With me tonight is election Twitter, and maybe Twitter in general, most well-known Georgia analysis when it comes to politics. He is maybe one of the biggest rising stars in the analysis world. He has written for Decision Desk and Crystal Ball. Niles Francis. Niles, I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. It's a lot going on in Georgia, and I'm glad to talk about it here with you guys.
Yeah. So we're just going to start off with maybe just a bit of a benchmark question here. So obviously, Georgia, which is the shift in the Atlanta suburbs, has become such a highly polarized and a highly contested state, cleared by only about 10,000 votes that Joe Biden won by in November. So there's kind of these benchmarks that parties need to make to get a victory out there. So what do you think the benchmarks both parties? What do you think are the benchmarks that both parties need to make on election day to get their candidates to victory?
Well, for Republicans, it's quite simple. They need to drive up rural turnout. That's why you see President Trump going up to Northwest Georgia tonight, which I will be watching right after we log off of here. So that's why you have Republicans are spending a lot of time trying to focus on their rural turnout operation, because they are well aware of the Democrats' early vote advantage. They know that Black voters are voting early in higher numbers than they did in November. They know that, so that's why they're banking on this high election day turnout to offset that. Will it work? We'll find out tomorrow. But one also has to wonder why Senator Leffler announced today that she would object to the Electoral College results. Does that have anything to do with wanting to drive up rural turnout, or are they concerned that they're not getting the turnout that they need? So, a lot of questions being raised there.
Yeah, of course. And if we're going to move on here, I think a thing that's kind of been under discussed, in my opinion, has been the amount of money that we've seen spent in this race just since we've headed to the runoff period alone. I think I saw a figure today of that combined between the two races, it is up to nearly $840 million. I'm going to bring this into two-parter. That type of money being spent in any race is unreal. The fact that we're seeing at least $420 million on average spent in a single race is unreal. Do you think that's good? Do you think this is a good thing personally for American politics, that we're that in a 2-month period we're seeing that amount of money be spent in a singular state on two singular races?
Well, first, let me start by showing you this. These are all of the mailers that I have received over the last few months. So, the money is ridiculous. These are pretty much all the mailers that I've saved over the last few. I threw some of them away because they were the same ones. But these are just some of the mailers that I've received over the last few months. And you can't turn on a TV on local television here in Georgia. You cannot turn on a TV without seeing a campaign ad. It's crazy. Ad after ad after ad is a campaign ad from either the campaigns or outside groups. So it's ridiculous. It really is. In one way, I understand why these races are bringing in a lot of money, because it's control of the Senate on the line here. It's not every day that control of the Senate hinges on one state. On the other hand, I don't think it should cost nearly $1 billion in one state for two Senate races. So I kind of see both sides of the equation there.
Yeah, and then maybe you mentioned almost $1 billion, but it feels like without really that many regulations on outside spending in American politics right now. Do you think it's possible in this next decade? We're in a new decade now, the 2020s. Do you think it's possible that within the 2020s we could see the first $1 billion non-presidential race?
I mean, the cost of Senate races just keeps going up and up every cycle. Drew mentioned this a few weeks ago, but about $90 million was spent on the 2012 Senate race in Massachusetts between Scott Brown and some woman named Elizabeth Warren. Never heard of her. But anyway, we've already well surpassed $90 million in both of these Georgia races. Like, we're nearing $1 billion. So the races here in Georgia are already setting records for the most expensive Senate races in history. And at the time, the 2012 Senate race in Massachusetts was the most expensive Senate race in history. We've well surpassed that now. So it just seems like the cost of these down ballot races just keeps going up and up every cycle. Like we saw in the 2000 in the last year's Senate race in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison raised $57 million in one quarter. Ossoff and Warnock have combined raised like 4 times that in a single quarter. So it's ridiculous the amount of money being spent in these races. Like on one, like it's another situation where I see both sides of the equation. Like, on one hand, it's good that more people are taking interest to down ballot races and how important they are, but on the other, like, these races, the amount of spending in these races is just ridiculous.
And I mean, there's time been talking about just like when it comes to the amount of money that's being spent in some of these races, that it kind of there's always discussion. If you ever taken a political science class when it relates to campaigns, if any of our listeners have been in college, if you've ever taken a political science campaign class that's kind of focused on campaigns, there's kind of this idea sometimes that there's kind of a leveling effect when it comes to money spent, money raised, that it can only do so much. But when it comes down to such an important race like this, do you think that's something that actually happens, or do you think that, spending money no matter how much it is, will in the end likely help you out?
Well, this is a runoff election, and in runoff elections, most voters tend to have already made up their minds. So I don't runoffs. The way runoffs work, Georgia's really the only state is the only state that has general election runoffs. Runoffs are usually turnout competitions. Like, whichever party can do a better job of turning out their base will be the party that wins the runoff. I think that's why we're seeing all this money being spent by both parties. Like, they know that we need to turn out our voters. If we don't turn out our voters, we're not going to win. So that's probably why you're seeing all the money being spent in these races. So, but I don't really think it changes votes. The money being, I don't think it changes votes. I don't think someone's going to switch their vote based off of like a campaign ad that they saw. I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's more like, it just turns out your voters. It motivates the party base. That's really all it is to it.
Yeah. Okay. So to keep it on turnout a little bit, what are the areas that you think we should be looking for that could have huge turnout, especially for a runoff? We already know that this turnout wise in this runoff is going to theoretically destroy previous Georgia numbers when it comes to runoffs. But where do you think areas for both parties are where we're going to probably see some of the most turnout? Obviously, I know most people are going to think Atlanta and the Northeast probably going to see some of the most turnouts for Democrats and Republicans respectively. But I want to hear what you think, and if there might be any area that might surprise us to see how high a turnout could be.
Well, if most of you have been keeping track of the early voting numbers the way I have, you'll know that some counties down in Southwest Georgia, some majority African American counties down in Southwest Georgia are seeing some pretty good turnout numbers compared to the November general election, and that's partly why you're seeing a higher share of the black. African Americans are making up a higher share of the electorate so far than they did in November. Like in November total, the African Americans made up like 27% of the electorate. Right now, that number is hanging at around 30%. So that's a 3% increase. And in a state where the presidential election was decided by like 12,000 votes, numbers like that, an increase like that, can make a huge difference either way. So I think that's one area that I would keep an eye on tomorrow is Southwest Georgia. That's where you have a lot of rural, majority black counties, and those counties are seeing some pretty interesting turnout numbers compared to November. So it's worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe those southeastern counties, those would mostly be in Sanford Bishop's district. If I am correct in that, I believe those would mostly be in Sanford Bishop's
yes.
district. Okay.
Correct.
All right. And, obviously the African-American turnout, and not just in those areas, but in Atlanta and in Georgia, it's been such a huge part of why Georgia is now suddenly a competitive state after 2 decades of being a blood red GOP state. It's why it's turned back competitive. As a young, very, very much into it African-American male, how much effect do you think has that shift in growth in numbers in how blacks have voted in Georgia? Excuse me. How much do you think that shift has contributed to this ability to suddenly become competitive for Democrats again? And how much do you think it could be worthwhile to say this isn't just going to be a toss-up state, this is going to be a blue state, and that's because of the backs of the high number of votes we're seeing from African-American voters?
Well, right now, I'd say that Georgia is firmly a purple state. Like, it's probably one of the most competitive states on the map at the moment. Like, it was only decided by 12,000 votes in the presidential election. That's pretty close. But in terms of African Americans, like, a lot of it stems from African Americans who were not previously registered to vote. Registering to vote, that's part of what it is. And then another part could be younger African Americans, like first-time voters, like, African-American first-time voters, such as myself, registering to vote for the first time and voting for the first time. So it's a lot of interesting factors at play here. You can say what you want about former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, but I think her organization has done a pretty great job of registering African-American voters, like bringing new voters to the polls and making sure that younger African-Americans are aware of the stakes in these elections. You can disagree with her on politics all you want, but I think her organization has done a really great job of increasing African-American turnout and minority turnout across the board, especially among voters who were not previously registered to vote or who have not voted before. So I think her organization has done a great job of finding new voters out there.
And this is a question we got in the chat here, but I just wanted to ask you: is there any Latino voters? So it's kind of become this huge topic of discussion, or could we see any effect from Hispanic or Latino voters really? Do you think that could cause any effect in Georgia? I'm not a big knowledge of Georgian demographics population wise. I'm a northern boy. Georgia's not my specialty. But are there any like Latino basins in Atlanta that maybe could continue to see some of the shifts that we saw really across the nation in majority Latino hubs, where they were still maybe heavily Democratic, but we saw this 2, 3, 4, 5% shift towards Republicans? Are there really any basins like that in Georgia, or really mainly around the Atlanta area, that maybe we should pay attention to?
Well, unlike Florida, where they're pretty much all concentrated in Miami-Dade County, in Georgia, I'd say they're scattered all over the place here in Georgia. But one county that has a pretty decent Hispanic population in Georgia is Hall County. Hall County is in northeast Georgia. Most of it is in Doug Collins' former district. It has there are several meat packing plants in Hall County, but the county is pretty solidly red. So the only thing I'm going to be watching there is really turnout, like not any shifts among Hispanic voters, but really there the only thing I'm going to be watching is turnout, because Republicans, that's one of the largest solidly Republican counties in the state, Hall County. So I'd keep an eye on that tomorrow, just in terms of turnout, because Republicans, that's one of the areas where they will need high turnout if they want to win tomorrow.
Yeah. And I mean, like we've kind of said, Elections Daily as an organization has made this argument when we made our ratings. Many other analysts have made this idea that it really does all come down to turnout in this race. And you've mentioned, of course, the President of the United States will be there in Northeast Georgia tonight. He will be holding a rally. What some Republicans, I'm sure, are hoping will drive up turnout. Others are concerned that he will continue to spew the rhetoric that he has on Twitter of rigged elections and rigged ballots. Obviously, again, major falsehoods about the security of our elections. Do you think that the president's rhetoric, do you think, has that had an impact on turnout at all, in your opinion? Or do you think this is kind of just something that people will keep in the back of their minds, but they're still just going to go out there and vote because that's what they normally do?
Well, we're really not going to know if it had an impact on turnout until tomorrow, because we know that most of his supporters are going to vote on election day. He spent the entire campaign railing against mail-in ballots, and we know that Trump supporters don't trust those. So we know that most of those voters are going to be voting on election day. It's just a matter of how many. In terms of his rhetoric has been pretty interesting for those of you who have been watching it. Like, the entire time he has been saying that the election is rigged in Georgia, but we need you to vote again in these runoffs. So, like, it's kind of a you really can't say both of those things at the same time. Like, either the election is rigged or it's not. Like, you can't tell. It really doesn't make any sense to tell your supporters to go vote again in an election that's rigged, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So will be interesting to see what his rhetoric is like at this rally tonight. My hunch tells me that it will be all over the place. So we'll see what happens, but I think I'm going to be watching how much time he spends talking about Purdue and Leffler, as opposed to what most of us expect he'll be doing, railing against Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, elections, voting systems, things like that. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. How much time does he spend talking about the candidates and not airing his own grievances?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you brought up. And this is going to be, I think, a really interesting rally, because I feel like it's incredibly likely that we are going to see an appearance from arguably the GOP's most controversial congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It's in her district.
Her district. So, yeah, she's likely to make an appearance there tonight. I believe it would be her first official appearance with the president, if I'm not mistaken on that. I believe that would be her first actual appearance with the president on stage.
Yeah, she's attended Trump rallies before, but I don't believe she's ever spoken at any. I haven't looked at the lineup for this rally tonight, but this is in her district. Dalton is the heart of her district. So yeah, she'll probably have a pretty decent presence at that rally tonight, I would expect.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the question about the conspiracy theories, and I guess we're going to kind of delve into I want your opinion on this, the conspiracy theories, how she's kind of driven them. She's been a huge part of the idea. She wore, when she was forced to wear one, a Trump won mask, which is way off the beaten path at this point, in my opinion. Do you think that rhetoric like that is helping or hurting, Republicans in the end? Because sure, I love to see it when we have these boosted, red turnouts in northeastern Georgia and northwestern Georgia. I love it. But we can't win unless we win at least in some of those population areas, especially in Gwinnett and Fulton. Do you think, having someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene up there and, continuing to kind of build on this rhetoric, do you think that we could even see a shift away from Republicans more in those suburban counties than we even saw in November?
Well, it really all depends on the presence that mind you, she has a safe seat, so she could feasibly stay in Congress for many, many years. It really all depends on how big of a presence she becomes within Republican circles, and really how dominant Trump continues to be over the next few years. Like, he's floated running again in 2024. We'll see if that materializes, but because Trump has really been like the driving force of the trends that we've seen in counties like Gwinnett, counties like Cobb and Henry. So if he continues to play a large presence in our, politics going forward, then maybe we could continue to see these kinds of shifts for the next few years. But in regards to Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone put this very well the other day, and they actually made a really good point. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the type of voter that Republican politicians are supposed to appeal to. They don't expect those types of voters to run for office. So that's pretty much the way a friend put it the other day, and they made a really good point. You don't see candidates like her run for office all the time. It's not every day that you see candidates like her, win Republican primaries. That doesn't happen often. And the fact that the Republican Party leadership really didn't play much of a role in that Republican primary, I think that kind of speaks to the how mainstream conspiracy theories have become in our politics. It's unfortunate, but I know it's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong on that. I mean, I know I voiced my frustration when we were holding our runoffs live stream back in August when we were finishing up when they were finishing off the runoff primaries. I voiced my frustration with Republican leadership. I've seen many of my others, fellow younger Republicans, exhale frustration with leadership in that time period when they did not really get involved in that primary in the
Yeah,
14th district.
yeah, I was just going to say that Steve Scalise was the only member of Republican leadership who
we had people calling for McCarthy's head after this. I mean, we had people openly asking online that Scalise should challenge McCarthy. Obviously, I think that is something that would have happened if we had seen the blue wave that we all thought we were going to see potentially in November. That didn't happen. Obviously, you cannot kick even though I don't like the guy as much. You can't. I have to say you can't kick him out. After you see a double-digit seat gain, you can't kick him out. That's just a near impossibility to do. So we're kind of dealt with the hand that we've got right here. But we're going to move on to something I think people are going to find interesting. There's been talk, in my opinion, or at least not enough of it, in my opinion, about the possibility of a split result. Because obviously we've got two races here, and we've got one with kind of the more establishment catered one. We have David Perdue, a lifelong political interest, part of a Georgia specialty. He is the incumbent senator. You've got John Ossoff, who has connections to now deceased John Lewis, who was a behemoth of a congressman in Georgia for decades. And then you have the other race, which it's a businesswoman who was appointed by Brian Kemp, Kelly Leffler, to be a senator, who had donated millions upon millions of dollars to his campaign. And then you have the pastor, Raphael Warnock, kind of the outsider versus the insider. The outsider of the outsider and the insider of the insider in these Senate races. Perdue only didn't miss the runoff, missed that cutoff to avoid a runoff by only a couple thousand of votes. There's been talk about this all the time. Do you think that there is potential for a split result tomorrow night in these Senate races, in which I think the most likely split, I think, from NP will be that would be Perdue-Warnock? Do you think that split is possible? You live in the area, you're on the ground. Do you think that split is possible?
I don't, and here's why. Because we've really seen, since about August or September, we've seen both Ossoff and Warnock kind of running as like a unity ticket. And the same thing, ever since she made the runoff, we've really seen the same thing with Perdue and Leffler. They both parties are kind of, both sets of candidates are kind of like running in tandem with each other, running as tickets. So I really don't think that we will see a split result, because I think voters are well aware that you're kind of getting like a package deal with both sets of candidates. And we live in an era of hyper partisanship, low ticket splitting. Like, I don't really think we're going to see a split result, because in the presidential election we only saw but like somewhere around like a dozen or so congressional districts split their results for House and presidents. That's a record low. Like in 2008, like there were like a lot of Obama.
I believe it was over 80. I believe it was over 80 congressional districts in 2008.
Yeah, so, exactly. And
either Obama Republican or Democrat Republican in those.
Yeah, and we didn't see a lot of those this time. Like, I really don't know how many Trump Democratic districts there were, but there were 9 Biden Republican districts. That's a record low. Like, and for that reason alone, I don't think we're going to see much ticket splitting in these races, because we've really seen a decline in ticket splitting over the last few years. And even to use the Senate as an example, only one state has split its results for Senate and president ever since 2016, and that's Maine. And Susan Collins is kind of an institution in Maine, and she's really perhaps the only politician who could still pull something like that off. But I really don't think we're going to see much ticket splitting tomorrow, because both sets of candidates are running together. They've campaigned together, done TV ads together. Like Republicans, Kelly Leffler and David Perdue, they both did an ad with Herschel Walker a few weeks ago. And Warnock and Ossoff, they did an ad with President-elect Joe Biden. So both sets of candidates. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, I was just saying both sets of candidates are running together. So I think I don't really think we're going to see many we're not going to see many split tickets because, you know, we live in an era of hyper-partisanship, and both sets of candidates are kind of running together to kind of offset any potential, you know, ticket splitting that we may see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be something that's really interesting to see, of course. And you mentioned up ads, though. I've seen you. You have, of course, a huge presence online. You one of the most followed analysts when it comes to stuff like this. You are, of course, a major Democrat. That's why I had you on. I wanted to kind of get this perspective from you. Obviously, you have called out David Perdue and Kelly Leffler. Kelly Leffler, especially since he is running against Raphael Warnock, who is a black male, for kind of going into this race, seeping into racial tensions in her hats. I mean, can you kind of at least explain to your viewers, you know, why you think some of Miss Leffler, Senator Leffler's ads are racist? I just want to hear why you think they are racist and why you think that, you know, she's kind of playing in this game here where she's kind of delving into that territory.
Yeah, well, first let's start off with a little backstory about Senator Leffler. Like, she co-owned Atlanta's WNBA team, women's basketball team, and the WNBA has a lot of black female players. So, and you saw most of them right after Leffler kind of delved into this Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization kind of rhetoric. Like, you saw most of them walking onto the court wearing Vote Warnock t-shirts. So it kind of gives you an idea of how her players view her and her views. But in regards to her ads about Raphael Warnock, I do think that, like, you know, she is running a pretty racially charged campaign. She has, like, you know, she and Republicans have been saying that Reverend Warnock is the most radical candidate in Georgia history when we have had segregationists as our senators. We've had, you know, some pretty racist senators in the past. So I don't think Warnock is by any means, I don't think he's the most radical candidate in Georgia history. And she's making it, in my opinion, I think she's making it pretty widely known that her opponent is an African-American male without saying it out loud. Like, you know, she's called him things like a Marxist, a radical, things like that. Like, a lot of buzzwords that you would hear in Republican circles about candidates of color. It's pretty, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but I want to say it's surprising, but I really can't say that it is.
Okay, I want to hear this about this because it was kind of discussed, especially in the summertime, that maybe these candidates really weren't the strongest. And I see someone brought up in the comments, Cynthia McKinney, who was a part of Georgia politics for a while. If you want to talk about another radical, maybe on the other side of things, she certainly is an option right there.
Yeah.
But both of these candidates, when we were talking about discussion in the summertime, were kind of seen maybe not as strong as we thought they were. There were especially a lot of questions about Warnock in the summertime, especially in the early summertime around June and July. A lot of questions about whether he could even beat Matt Lieberman to that second runoff, whether maybe Democrats are splitting too much of their vote where he wasn't showing himself up on that. And then Republicans are going to get in here with a Leffler-Collins runoff, which would have certainly been interesting to see if that was going on right now. I don't think we'd probably be talking about Georgia as much right now if that had happened. Clearly it didn't. Are you surprised by how strong both of these the races that both these candidates have run? Are you really surprised by either of them? I know you voted Warnock. If you're willing to tell us, I don't know how you voted in the June primary, whether you voted for Ossoff. I know you like Teresa Tomlinson quite a lot too. So are you surprised really that, you know, one or even both these candidates have kind of made these races really, really, really close? In really what was thought maybe a candidate like Joe Biden could make a state like Georgia close.
Well, to answer your question, in the June primary, I did end up voting for John Ossoff, but I will say that in a way, like, early on, I wasn't enthusiastic about about Democrats' chances in both of these races, but I will say, in a way, Ossoff and Warnock were both kind of tailor made for this moment. Like, amidst a conversation about racial justice, social justice, like, one of the candidates is the Black pastor of the church where Martin Luther King Jr. first started preaching many years ago. So, and then in an era where young people are being hit very hard by the pandemic in terms of, like, school and work and things like that. Like, the other candidate is a young Jewish man. So it's kind of, in a way, both of them were kind of, early on, I wasn't as enthusiastic about Democrats' chances in these races, but both Ossoff and Warnock seem to have, kind of realized that they are running at a very, very historic time for our country. Like I said, like, you have a conversation about racial justice, and you have young people being hit especially hard by the pandemic and its economic impacts. And, Ossoff, if he were to win, would be the first millennial senator in U.S. history. And I think that would be kind of symbolic in terms of, like, young people getting hit very hard by the pandemic. Like, it would be nice if they, had a voice in the Senate. It would be interesting. And for Warnock, he would be Georgia's first Black senator. That would be pretty symbolic given what we saw a few, early last year with the tragic murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Both of the men who killed him are still facing trial, but it would be symbolic if both of them were to win, simply because, like, we're in a very interesting time for this country. So yes, early on, I was not as enthusiastic about Democrats' chances, but both have, not only are they raising record amounts of money, they have both proven to they have both realized that they are running at a that they are special candidates for a special time, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, but you can't even say that maybe you're at least a little bit surprised about John Ossoff. I mean, it's just a guy that everyone had kind of written off that we didn't really think we'd see in 2020. He had lost that 2017 special in the 6th district to Karen Handel. We kind of thought he was done. His 2020 announcement kind of came as a surprise. He did obviously get the big John Lewis endorsement right off the bat, which was pretty big, and him being able to not be forced to run off against Teresa Tomlinson in that Senate primary. It's just, I mean, it seems like an impeccable rise. Maybe that's just kind of been what is the momentum. I know we don't always like using that word when it comes to elections, but the momentum for Ossoff just seems to have been carrying him.
Yeah, I was at President-elect Joe Biden's rally today with Ossoff and Warnock, and Ossoff, he drew, I'd say, other than Biden, he drew the loudest applause of all of the speakers, even more so than Warnock. So Ossoff, I don't know, like, I followed him ever since his campaign for Congress in 2017, and I can tell you that the John Ossoff now is much different from the John Ossoff from 2017. I don't know what changed. Maybe it's just, like I said, these historic times, these tragic circumstances that we're going through with COVID and racial justice and things like that. But he's changed. Like, he's a better speaker. And, like, even in 2017, he really wasn't going after Karen Handel as hard as he's going after David Perdue. Like, he's attacked David Perdue by name several times in his stump speeches and his TV ads, and he really didn't do any of that with Karen Handel in 2017. I've told this to a bunch of other people, but my theory is that he was caught off guard by the national attention that the 2017 race received, and he didn't know how to handle it being a first-time candidate. And now that he knows what that's like, now that we are in the midst of, among other things, COVID, and, like, this, a president who is refusing to concede defeat, several factors coming together to kind of, boost him. And then you also have to give it to his digital team. Like, he has probably one of the best digital teams of any candidate that I've ever seen. Like, we can talk about how annoying TikTok is, but that works with young people. Young people use those kinds of things, and he probably has the best digital team that I've seen, only second to Ed Markey, which what we saw in the Massachusetts primary a few months ago. Like, obviously Ed Markey is like John Ossoff is like less than half Markey's age, so that helps. So
Yeah.
that helps, being like younger and knowing what young people knowing what young people do and things like that. So I think that kind of helps. Like, his age is definitely a huge factor in the way he appeals to young voters.
Yeah. And, we're going to go into the final two questions here. But my first question here, we're down into the final 12 hours, really. Less than 12 hours until polls open in Georgia tomorrow. We're about less than 12 hours away now until the election day vote can turn out. Do you think that anything, I mean, obviously Donald Trump's rally starts in only about 24 minutes, but do you think what, if anything, could maybe be a shifter in this race in the next 12 hours? Or do you think, have people decided at this point when they're going to vote, have they decided they're going to go vote? And what we see tonight, what people are thinking tonight is what we're going to see in the results tomorrow.
Well, for Democratic voters anyway, or Democratic-leaning voters, most of them have already voted. Like, right now, turnout is at 3 million votes, over 3 million votes. That's a record for a runoff election. It's like, it well surpasses, the last time Georgia had a U.S. Senate runoff was in 2008. At that time, in that runoff, 2.1 million people turned out, and we're already well past that now. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if turnout was like double that this time. So it's it's crazy, but most voters, for the most part, have already made up their minds. They already know who they're going to vote for. They've already voted. And you have to give it to the Democrats for running a really robust early vote operation. Like 3 million votes, regardless of who those 3 million voters may have voted for, those 3 million votes are 3 million votes that can't be changed. So those votes are already baked in. Like, it's all about, whatever turnout that, we see tomorrow that ultimately decides this. And I do expect the election day vote to lean Republican, as we have seen in November. Like, I looked at it in back late last year. Early voting, in-person election day voting in Georgia was like, it was overwhelmingly for Trump. So, and it did make up a smaller share of the electorate than mail-in voting and absentee voting, and that's about what I expect this time as well. How big of a share it makes up will determine whether or not Republicans can offset any potential Democratic gains in early and mail-in voting. But I really don't think there are going to be many late events that could persuade a few voters, because this is, like I said, this is a base turnout election. And we will see what President Trump says at his rally tonight. But I do think that his rally, is the only purpose it serves is to motivate those rural voters who may not have voted yet or are still on the fence about voting because the election is rigged. That's why the messaging in his runoff, in his rally tonight, will be so critical. Like, is he going to say that the election is rigged and that you should still vote anyway, or is he going to spend most of the time airing his grievances, as we have seen him do at rallies in the past? But we'll see what happens. It'll be an interesting next 24 hours. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be a whirlwind.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But one final question. I want to see if I can bring this at you tonight. I want you to give our viewers and our listeners, because we're going to put this up tonight. It'll be on Spotify. It'll be on Apple Podcasts. People can listen to us if they want to listen to 45 minutes of us talking for some reason. I want to hear this from you. What is your final predictions for tomorrow night? Both races. I want margins. I want your winners. I want to hear it from you, man. Come on, give it to me here.
Well, the only firm prediction that I say I would have right now is that both races end up breaking for the same party. In terms of who I think has the advantage heading into tomorrow, I would say that it's the Democrats because of the early voting numbers that we've seen, because of President Trump's mixed messaging. We will see if his it remains to be seen if his rally tonight will drive up the rural turnout that Republicans will need. But I will say that going into tomorrow night, I do think Democrats have the advantage, but it all comes down to election day turnout, and we really won't know what that looks like until this time tomorrow.
Well, you know what? You're right. We're going to see by this time tomorrow. The polls will have closed by this point, and I'm going to plug it here now. Folks, if you're watching, we will have live coverage here on Elections Daily, starting with a preview of the regions at 7 o'clock with Harrison Laval and Eric Cunningham. Me and Kraz Greinitz will also eventually be on as we begin our final coverage from 2020 in 2021 as we cover the Georgia runoffs here on Elections Daily for all you tomorrow night. But I want to give a huge, huge thank you to Niles Francis for coming on with me tonight. We wish we were able to get a debate tonight with someone else. We obviously weren't able to, but I'm glad we were able to hear you talk. Hopefully, we'll be able to get you on sometime here soon. We'll be able to get you in a real debate here on Tough Talk. I want to still thank you, though, and have a good luck tomorrow night, and hope everything goes well.
Yeah, it's going to be a whirlwind over the next 24 hours, so just keep me in your prayers, everybody.
Again,
talk to you later.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your evening, and thank you all for listening. This has been Joe Szymanski with Elections Daily with Tough Talk. We will see you back here on Thursday night with a rundown of what happens tomorrow night.